The former home of Queen frontman Freddie Mercury is for sale in London. Built in 1907, the Kensington property features a bar, a library. He bought the house in 1980, making multiple renovations to incorporate his sense of style and his art collection.
When the gates of Freddie Mercury's London home finally opened, the air felt charged, like the world was about to step into a time capsule that had waited 3 long decades to breathe again. For years, Garden Lodge had stood silent behind tall, ivy-covered walls in Kensington, a quiet fortress that guarded the private life of one of the most flamboyant figures in rock history. From the outside, it looked ordinary, elegant but modest, with its soft green doors and timeless charm. But those who stepped inside would later say that nothing could have prepared them for what they saw. Because what lay within those rooms wasn't just the legacy of a superstar. It was the secret world of a man who had poured his heart, fears, and brilliance into every corner. It wasn't a house anymore. It was a soul preserved in silence. When the first visitors crossed the threshold, they expected extravagance, walls draped in velvet, chandeliers gleaming with gold, rooms echoing with the ghosts of rock and roll. They came looking for the legend. What they found instead was the man. Each step through those quiet halls stripped away the layers of performance that had defined Freddie Mercury for the world. The loud, theatrical, unstoppable frontman of Queen gave way to something quieter, gentler, and infinitely more human. Every object seemed to hum with his presence, but not the on-stage Freddie, the private one, the one the cameras never saw. The first room felt almost sacred. It wasn't the opulence that caught the eye, though it was there in flashes, but the stillness. A piano sat against the far wall, its keys slightly worn, as if waiting for the touch of fingers that would never return. On the surface were small scribbled notes, phrases, song ideas, random thoughts written on scraps of paper. Some were half-finished lyrics, others just single words circled in ink. It was there that someone spotted a sheet, faded, fragile, covered in Freddie's unmistakable handwriting. At first glance, it looked like any other lyric draft. But as it was carefully unfolded, the words "Bohemian Rhapsody" appeared at the top. The room seemed to exhale at once. It was the draft, one of the earliest versions of the song that had changed rock music forever. The pages told a story few had ever seen. Lines scratched out, rewritten and rearranged. Phrases that never made it into the final recording. Among them, one stood out, "Mama, there's a war outside." It had been crossed through in heavy ink, but it lingered like a ghost of what the song might have been. In that moment, it became clear. Genius wasn't lightning in a bottle. It was a process. It was doubt, experimentation, and persistence. Freddie Mercury, the untouchable icon, had wrestled with his own creations just like any artist, shaping chaos into beauty one line at a time. Seeing his handwriting, bold yet delicate, was like hearing his voice whisper from the past. But not everything in that room spoke of music. Some things whispered of something deeper, connection. In a drawer beneath the piano, among old sheet music and postcards, they found a stack of letters carefully bound with a faded ribbon. At first they thought they were love letters. In a way they were, just not from lovers. They were from fans, dozens of them. Some neatly typed, others scribbled in childish handwriting. Letters from across the world, from Tokyo, Rio, London, thanking him for his music, for his courage, for helping them feel seen when the world didn't. One from 1985 read, "When I was sick, your songs were the only thing that made me feel alive." Another simply said, "You saved me, Freddie." Some envelopes were still sealed. Postmarked 1984, 1986, untouched for nearly 40 years. Whether he ever read them, no one knows. But he kept them, every single one. That small act said more than any interview ever could. For all the glamour, for all the wild parties and outrageous performances, Freddie Mercury was someone who understood love, not in the grand gestures, but in the quiet ones. Keeping those letters meant he never forgot who was listening. As the exploration continued, the story of the house began to unfold in layers. Down a narrow hallway lined with Japanese prints and framed photographs, a door opened to a smaller room, dimly lit, intimate, almost melancholic. Inside were stacks of Polaroids, hundreds of them. These weren't the glossy shots of fame, no stage lights, no costumes, no audience. These were moments stolen from everyday life. Freddie lounging in a silk robe, laughing with friends in the garden, feeding his beloved cats Delilah and Oscar. In one, he's curled up on a couch with a blanket, half asleep. In another, he's making tea in the kitchen, smiling at the camera with a look of quiet contentment. One Polaroid, however, stood out among the rest. It was dated 1987, the year Freddie's life changed forever. In it, he's sitting alone at the piano, head bowed, illuminated only by a single desk lamp. His face is thinner, his expression softer. And though there's no performance here, there's something raw, almost defiant, in his presence. You can almost feel the weight of the moment. This was the year he was diagnosed with AIDS, and yet even then he sat at that piano creating. The photo wasn't sad, it was intimate. It showed a man still fighting to make art, even when his body was beginning to betray him. The Polaroids captured the side of Freddie that fame never could. Not the god of rock, but the man who laughed too loudly, who doted on his cats, who found beauty in simple things. They told a story of a life lived not just in front of millions, but in the quiet company of friends and love. Looking through them, visitors said it felt less like viewing an exhibit and more like paging through the private album of someone you knew, someone you loved, someone who had simply gone too soon. In the adjoining room, a vanity table sat perfectly preserved, its mirror framed with small photographs and trinkets. Among them was a silver-framed picture of Mary Austin, Freddie's longtime confidant, the woman he once called his common-law wife. Next to it was another frame, holding a picture of Jim Hutton, Freddie's partner in the final years of his life. Between them lay a small birthday card, simple and unassuming, signed in Jim's handwriting, "To my love, forever." Both photos had sat there side by side until the day he died. For all his fame and countless admirers, those two faces represented the love that defined him, one from the beginning, one from the end. Together, they told the story of a man whose greatest wealth wasn't in gold records or luxury, but in connection. There was another discovery that took everyone by surprise, a small notebook resting beside the bedside table. Its cover was plain, its pages filled with lists and reminders. Call Mum. Order flowers. Pick up Japanese print from framers. Dinner with Mary. Each line written in his neat, dramatic handwriting. To the world, he was larger than life, commanding stages, commanding hearts, but here, in this book, he was just Freddie, a son, a friend, a man trying to keep his world in order. It was profoundly ordinary, and somehow, that made it extraordinary. Even the objects scattered around the room seemed to tell stories. A pack of cigarettes left unopened. A collection of antique perfume bottles on a tray. A worn book of poetry with a pressed flower tucked between its pages. Nothing was arranged for display. It was as though the house had been paused mid-breath, waiting for him to return. For those who walked through it, it didn't feel like a museum. It felt like walking into a memory. But perhaps the most haunting moment came when one of the curators opened a small wooden drawer near his writing desk. Inside was a bundle of folded papers, delicate, yellowed with age. They weren't song lyrics or notes. They were letters, unsent letters, written in Freddie's unmistakable cursive, some addressed to friends, others to no one at all. The first began simply, "If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say it in person." The words that followed weren't grand or dramatic. They were gentle, grateful, and deeply human. One note read, "Don't mourn me with silence. Turn the volume up. No press release. No farewell performance. Just quiet goodbyes written in the stillness of Garden Lodge." For decades, these letters had waited, untouched, in the dark. And when they were finally found, the world understood. Freddie Mercury didn't leave without a word. He left words everywhere. In music, in ink, in the hearts of those who loved him. Walking through those rooms, one thing became clear. Garden Lodge wasn't built to impress. It was built to feel. Every inch of it was alive with emotion, a reflection of the man who had lived there. This was no longer about fame or legacy or even death. It was about love, in all its complicated, messy, enduring forms. The love of music, the love of friends, the love that stayed long after the spotlight dimmed. As the first day of the public opening came to an end, visitors left in near silence. Some wiped away tears. Others smiled softly as though they had met him for the first time. The outside world saw Freddie Mercury as immortal, a god of music who commanded the stage. But inside those walls, he was something far greater, a man who dared to live and love without apology. And as the doors of Garden Lodge closed again that evening, it was as if the house itself sighed, relieved that its stories had finally been heard. As the sun began to rise on the second day of the public opening, Garden Lodge took on a different feeling. The first day had been filled with awe, the kind that leaves people speechless, but the second felt like reflection. Visitors returned not as tourists, but as pilgrims. They came to understand that they weren't just stepping into Freddie Mercury's home. They were walking through his story, room by room, fragment by fragment, as if retracing the footprints of a life that refused to fade. Beyond the familiar, spaces, the piano room, the bedroom, the photographs. There were still corners of the house untouched, waiting to speak. Down a quiet corridor, past walls lined with paintings and a faint scent of incense, lay a door that had long remained closed. When it creaked open, light spilled across shelves filled from floor to ceiling with art, books, and curiosities collected from all over the world. This was Freddie's sanctuary, a private gallery where his passions beyond music came alive. Freddie Mercury was known for his flamboyance, but few realized how deeply he loved art. He studied it long before Queen ever became a name. Here, in this secret room, that love was evident in every object. There were delicate Japanese prints, Renaissance sketches, surrealist portraits, and antique sculptures. One shelf displayed small porcelain cats, dozens of them, each one different, each clearly chosen with care. Next to them, a small card in his handwriting read simply, "They remind me of peace." It was such a simple sentiment, yet it felt profoundly revealing. For a man whose life had been defined by noise, applause, and motion, this room was his still point, a place where the world outside could not intrude. But it wasn't just the art itself that caught people's attention. It was what lay tucked among it. In a small chest beneath a painting, there were sketchbooks filled with Freddie's own drawings. They weren't flamboyant or technical, but deeply personal. Faces, cats, flowers, abstract shapes, drawn with the same expressive confidence he carried on stage. One sketch showed the outline of a man at a microphone, his head thrown back, surrounded by lines of music that seemed to explode around him. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. The energy in that drawing was unmistakably his. As the curators moved deeper into the collection, they discovered another layer of Freddie's personality, his fascination with spirituality and reflection. Amid the artwork and journals were small Buddhist statues, crystals, and handwritten affirmations taped to the wall. One card, yellowed with age, read, "The most important thing is to be true to yourself." Simple, but powerful. It wasn't a quote from a philosopher or lyric from a song. It was his own handwriting, his own belief. Another note, tucked inside a book of poetry, read, "When the music ends, love must remain." It was impossible not to feel the weight of those words. In one corner of the room stood a small writing desk, elegant but worn, and on it lay a stack of journals. These were not songbooks or scripts, but personal diaries. Many were left partially filled, others completely blank. Out of respect, most were left unopened, but a few selected pages were shared with permission from Mary Austin, the woman Freddie once called the love of his life and who remained the guardian of Garden Lodge for decades after his passing. In one entry, written in 1989, he had penned, "The hardest thing about being adored by millions is remembering that you are still human when the lights go out." Another, more haunting line appeared near the end of the same journal. "I don't fear death. I fear being forgotten by those I loved." Those words seemed to echo through the entire house, a reminder that behind the legend was a man who longed not for eternal fame, but for lasting affection. Visitors later said those lines hit harder than any song could. It was the kind of vulnerability few expected from someone who had spent his life larger than life. Moving upstairs, the tone shifted again. The hallway leading to his studio was lined with photographs, not of Freddie, but of those he admired: Jimi Hendrix, Aretha Franklin, and Liza Minnelli. Each image bore small handwritten captions in his bold script. Under Hendrix it read, "A fire that never dies." Under Liza, energy, emotion, everything. It was like walking through his mind, seeing what inspired him, what he aspired to become. The studio itself was almost eerily intact. Instruments stood where they had been left, sheet music scattered across tables, microphones resting quietly as though waiting for his next session. A reel-to-reel tape recorder sat in the corner, covered in dust. When technicians restored and played it back, what they heard left them speechless. On the tape was Freddie's voice, raw, unaccompanied, softly singing an unfamiliar melody, just piano and voice. The lyrics were simple. "Don't close the door, the light is still on." It wasn't a finished song, just an idea, but it carried that unmistakable Freddie blend of melancholy and strength. Some called it a goodbye in music form. Others said it sounded like hope. Whatever it was real, another piece of him that had waited decades to be found. As news of these discoveries spread, the reaction from fans and the public was overwhelming. People lined up outside Garden Lodge for hours, some just to stand by the gate and leave flowers, letters, or photographs. For years, the house had been mythologized, an unreachable symbol of Freddie's private life. Now it was open, and what people found wasn't scandal or decadence, but humanity. One visitor wrote in the guest book, "I came to see the legend. I found the man." Another simply wrote, "Thank you for letting us know him again." And then, just when it seemed that Garden Lodge had revealed all its secrets, another discovery surfaced, one that many called the most moving of all. In the farthest corner of the attic, behind stacks of costumes and stage props, was a large trunk sealed with brass clasps. Inside were personal items Freddie had saved throughout his life. Postcards from childhood, letters from his parents, old boarding passes, a school photo where he's smiling shyly at the camera. But at the bottom lay something no one expected. A folded piece of paper, fragile with time, wrapped in plastic. It was a letter addressed to whoever finds this. The handwriting was unmistakable. The note read, "I've lived the life I dreamed of, and I paid the price for it. Gladly. If my home ever opens its doors, I hope those who walk through feel joy, not sadness. I hope they remember that I laughed often, that I loved deeply, and that every song was written with the same heart that beats in all of us. Don't idolize me. Just turn the music on and dance." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. It was his final curtain call, not shouted from a stage, but whispered from a drawer in his home. Those who read it said it felt like he was still speaking to them across time and silence, urging them not to mourn but to celebrate. After that letter was revealed, the energy around Garden Lodge shifted again. It was no longer just a house or a museum. It had become a bridge between the man and the myth. Standing inside, people said they could feel both his presence and his peace. The rooms didn't feel empty. They felt alive, as if the music still lingered in the air, faint but eternal. Mary Austin once said that Freddie's greatest wish was to be remembered for his spirit, not his tragedy. He didn't want pity, she said. He wanted joy. And that's what Garden Lodge ultimately offered. Joy, in its most unexpected form. Joy in the color of his walls, the laughter frozen in his Polaroids, the handwritten jokes in his notes, the playfulness even in his art. He had filled his home with life because he knew one day it would be all that was left. Outside, the world still mourned him. Decades later, his music still echoed from car radios, wedding dances, and stadiums. But for those who had walked through Garden Lodge, the songs meant something new. Bohemian Rhapsody, once a dramatic anthem, now felt like a confession. Somebody to Love sounded less like a performance and more like a prayer. Every lyric took on new meaning when you'd seen the tenderness behind the voice that sang them. And yet, there was one more space few people expected to move them the most: the garden itself. Just beyond the French doors, hidden from the street by tall hedges, lay Freddie's favorite place, his sanctuary. The garden was quiet, blooming with roses, Japanese maples, and wild ivy. A small bench overlooked a pond, and on it sat a plaque that read simply, "For Freddie, always loved." It was placed there years after his death, but it felt timeless. Many visitors said they could imagine him sitting there in his final years, wrapped in a scarf, sipping tea, surrounded by cats, watching the sun set behind the walls he'd built to protect his peace. The garden, like the house, carried no sense of mourning. It was alive. Birds sang, flowers grew. The world kept turning, just as he'd wanted it to. And perhaps that was the most shocking discovery of all, that a man who had once seemed larger than life had created something so tender, so full of heart, that it could outlive him quietly, beautifully. When the public tours finally ended and the gates closed once more, Garden Lodge returned to silence. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not secrecy, but serenity. The world had finally seen the truth of Freddie Mercury, not the icon, not the performer, but the human being, complex, brilliant, vulnerable, loving. In the end, it wasn't the crown, the stage clothes, or the fame that defined him. It was the handwriting on scraps of paper, the laughter in photographs, the unspoken goodbyes left in drawers. Freddie Mercury's London home shocked the world, not because of what it revealed about fame, but because of what it revealed about life. That even in his final years, behind closed doors, he remained exactly what he'd always been: a creator, a lover, a dreamer. The music never stopped for him. It just changed form. It lived on in ink, in laughter, in love, and now, in the hearts of everyone who finally saw the man behind the magic. And as visitors left that quiet house for the last time, one thought echoed in every mind, unspoken but shared by all: he never really left. He just turned the volume down.